Hi, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Sam Connell,
And I'm Kathleen Krause.
and this is Booked Solid, the podcast for readers of young adult, new adult, and forever young adults at heart. This month we read a really interesting book. Kathleen, do you want to tell us about The House on the Cerulean Sea?
Sure. All right, so The House on the Cerulean Sea starts with Linus Baker leading this quiet, solitary life. He lives in this tiny house with his cat and his old records, and he works as a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. So basically what he does is he works with these children with extraordinary abilities. He makes sure that the orphanages they live in are treating them well and recommends whether or not they should be shut down. But after he leaves, he basically never interacts with them again until he's summoned to this really top secret mission where he's going to a secluded island orphanage where these 6 dangerous children reside: a gnome, a sprite, a wyvern, an unidentifiable green blob, a were-Pomeranian, and the Antichrist. And so this is kind of the kickoff of this really amazing story about how maybe not everyone is who they seem, what our preconceived notions are. Maybe they're not as dangerous as we're being told, in the extremely upper management. And then also Linus is meeting the head of the orphanage, Arthur Parnassus, and they get close. And it's all about what is Linus going to do when he needs to present his report to the department in charge of magical youth.
We do need to warn you that we're going to spoil everything. So if you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, you might want to hit pause or come back because we are going to go through all of the details as well as the ending and chat about all of those things. We picked this book because it's part of the summer reading list from our local New Canaan High School library. At the helm, the chair of the library department is Michelle Ludala, and she is quite the mover and shaker. She literally won a mover and shaker award in librarianship. She's terrific. I get to catch up with her pretty frequently. She recently wrote an article in the school library journal about citizen journalism and information literacy. If you want to talk about the different ways of modern information gathering, she's a wonderful resource for our community. But Kathleen, you got to sit down and chat with her recently.
Yeah, we had a great talk about the summer reading list and lists and books that she's recommending and talking about and thinking about right now. And it was just really fascinating to hear what we have to look forward to over the summer, but also just some of the things that she's reading.
So let's take a listen right here.
So I'm here with Michelle Ludala, who many of you may know from the New Canaan High School Library. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for agreeing to be on our podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I love any work we can do with the town library. Is a pleasure.
We're really happy that you're here. Before we get started discussing the summer reading list, I was hoping you could let us know a little bit more about what you do at the high school.
Well, I have been here in August. I will have been here 20 years. At the high school, and I've been a school librarian that whole time, library department chair since 2004. I can't believe how many students I've seen cycle through this program. It's been amazing. But for 17 of those years, we've put together an original summer reading list every year. And while a huge part of our program here focuses on inquiry and getting students to be responsible consumers of information, we also do a lot of focus on reading and independent reading. And part of that effort really stems from the summer reading list, which is an offshoot that we come back to throughout the rest of the year because it becomes our high interest reading collection for the upcoming year. So whatever work we do on the summer reading list ends up being our sort of high interest reading list for the following year.
We have mentioned, I know, many times on this podcast that we are huge fans of that summer reading list, and so we were so excited. So we got a sneak peek of this year's, but we also featured last year's on our podcast, and we will, in June, you will be sending over the books. In case people aren't aware of this, we get the books from the high school after school is out, and then we feature them on a cart so that, anyone who's coming into the library, not just high school students necessarily, but all of our patrons can browse those titles, which are very curated. and they can find a great read there. Is there anything else you can tell us about either the process that goes into putting the list together, any particular goals for this year, or anything that you're keeping in mind as you are, because this is still early, but as you are putting it together to release in June?
First, I want to thank the town library for being such a great partner in this endeavor. It seemed absolutely logical to us to have books in a place where they could continue to circulate over the summer. So this is such an important service that you guys provide, and we really appreciate that you continue to circulate our materials. One thing that we've been focusing on quite a bit this year, we have a new district goal for the New Canaan Public Schools. It's Goal 4, and it's called Promote an Environment that Fosters Respect, Ethical Behavior, and Responsible Global Citizenship. And with that goal in mind, we've actually had a librarian book club for the elementary, middle, and high school, and Ms. Mabey is also with us for that. So we're really excited for that. So we've been doing a lot of reading around that topic to make sure that our collections are representative. We've been doing a lot of awareness and self-reflection around that too. 3 of the books that will surface on this summer reading list, 2 of which are new this year, so they were not here on the summer reading list last year. One is called The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person, and it's written by Frederick Joseph, who writes this book in the most personable, really authentic voice. It's really accessible for young people, and for each big lesson that he's sharing about how to be a better ally, he shares an anecdote of his own personal experience, and he also has a really great glossary of language. So when I was doing, and I did it in audiobook, when I first did the audiobook, I was like, wait, what is this encyclopedia he keeps referring to? And then I finally picked up the print book and said, aha, there is the encyclopedia. It's right there in the book. So we really loved that. And that was one of the books that was discussed at our librarian book club. And we think it has really great appeal for many grade levels, although there is some language that is a concern for some students. So if that's a concern for the families, and that we might want to wait a little while before you introduce that book. Another book that we're going to bring back to the summer reading list is Stamped by both Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi. So this is a reworking of a book by Ibram Kendi that was made for an adult audience. It's a pretty substantive book, and he worked with Jason Reynolds, who's written numerous really popular young adult titles, including All American Boys and A Long Way Down. I haven't seen a young adult author who really does such great dialogue and voice since Chris Crutcher. I mean, I really love his voice. And so he partnered with Ibram Kendi, who is a professor at American University, and they kind of reframed this text that was really substantive and kind of inaccessible to a younger audience and made it very accessible. So I really like that. But it's really sort of chronicles the history of racism in America, and it takes a very fresh look at characters and people and sort of who've long been discussed in the history of civil rights in the United States, and frames them in a different light. So it's really informative. I mean, I had lots of ahas when I was reading that book. So it was my kick to go read the full book, which I will do this summer. That was on the summer reading list last year also. The other book that's brand new that that sort of aligns with that goal is called Cast: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. And this is a really powerful nonfiction text that talks about racism, systemic racism in the United States, and it frames it as basically as the United States as a caste system, and it talks about the 7 pillars of caste, and it draws comparisons between India and the Third Reich in Germany and some of the elements of the caste system and racism here, and it basically draws a through line in those 3 civilizations and sort of says, here's why we can safely label this as caste. It's a really provocative thesis, and it's got me thinking about a lot of things that I have not thought about this way in a very long time. And Isabel Wilkerson is originally a journalist. She does it's a great piece of writing. It's exceptionally well researched, and she brings in her own personal anecdotes to make it more relatable as you go through the text, because it's a substantive text. Now, I heard her interviewed quite a bit when the book first came out in the fall, and it's taken me a while to pick it up. But one of the things that got me to pick it up was Stamped from the Beginning, or the Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi. So those three books are the books that align with that district goal, number 4. And this is part of an effort that we've made, as I said earlier, to really be more conscious and reflective about how much representation we have here in our collection. So that's that. I do want to highlight a couple of other books that have really sort of impacted me quite recently that don't have to do with that goal, so to speak. One is called, and it was recommended by a 9th grader here at the high school, and it's called The Cat I Never Named, A True Story of Love, War, and Survival. And it's by Amra Sabik El Reyes, and it's about Bosnia in the first part of the 1990s, so 1992 to 1996. And it's her memoir of the war in Bosnia. And as a Muslim girl in a city that was basically blockaded for years, there was very little access to food and supplies and important resources, and bombings were kind of ongoing and just a part of the life, and school was shut down for months at a time. And they talk about remote learning. They had their first remote learning experiences. That was one of the things that was very interesting about the story, was thinking back to that time and trying to sort of superimpose the current pandemic and contextualize that in what it might have felt like to her. So she made some references to that in her text. It's a really beautiful story. It's a great, easy read. She carries you along with her story. And you would think that, in a quarantine city, that basically under the threat of chronic bombing and violence and terror, it would be a very sad and almost really hard to read story, but it isn't. It's full of light and hope and laughter and all of those things too, in addition to the sorrow and hardship that they're facing. So that's that book. It's called The Cat I Never Named. And it was, like I said, it was recommended by a 9th grader. We're going to read that for our book club tomorrow. So I'm excited for that. That's our student book club, which we're really excited about. And the final book that I read this year that really made an impact on me is called Why We Are Polarized by Ezra Klein. And Ezra Klein was the founder of Vox Media, and he had a podcast called The Ezra Klein Show, and I really loved the show. It was very thoughtful, about 90 minutes long an episode, and he would interview somebody, a really deep and thoughtful conversation about basically political science for the most part. But he wrote this book, and it's really sort of almost a 50-year history of why our political structure has lent itself to lead us to this political polarization that we are in right now. And what I like about it, it's not about people. It's not about personalities. It's really about political systems. And that may sound like a really heavy and difficult to read book, but he's a great writer. I think journalists tend to be great writers. That's how they became journalists. And they write really great nonfiction books. And so that's one of the books that I highly recommend. Wow, that was a lot of words.
Those all sound so great, and I just like how diverse that list is of all these different topics and ideas and things that are going on in the world and how to think about them. And I really love that you're getting recommendations from students and then reading books, and that's kind of informing how your book clubs and your reading lists and things like that. So I think that's really exciting too. So we are just so thrilled, Sam and I, to get to see the final list in June and to read through them. And we always, just the thrill of standing in front of the cart and like going through and trying to pick which book do I want to read is so exciting.
I have to give a shout out to the American Library Association because we tend to sort of flounder around with the idea and not think about it too much until the third week in January, which is usually when the American Library Association releases its Youth Media Awards. And that's really what sort of kicks us into gear, and we create the reading list. We have on our website under reading, we have 10 years, believe it or not, of summer reading lists, and it's really kind of a kick to go back and look through them. We've long paid attention to making sure that there is a book in the summer reading list for every learner, but we do caution, particularly incoming ninth graders, that not every book on the list is for every student. So we always want to make sure that caveat is there. And so every student, this is part of moving up to the high school, needs to be aware of what their own family values are and where they fall into that. And if they ever pick up a book that doesn't suit their reading needs or are aligned with their interests or values, then they should put that book down and choose a different one, because there will be a different one.
I think that's great advice, yeah, because there are so many books on that list that there is a perfect read for everyone.
Exactly.
You just have to find it. Yep. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to speak with me. We are so excited to get to see the list.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kathleen. It's always great to talk to you.
It was great talking to you, too. And I feel like I learned so much.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Take care.
That was really neat. It's always wonderful to chat with Michelle, and she's always full of so many great, insightful ways to see where we are in this world and to just really expand our minds. And I always work my way through that summer reading list as an adult. I think that's a fantastic list, and we will have it up on our website at newcanaanlibrary.org. So Kathleen, what did you think of the book?
I think everyone that I've spoken to who has read it has referred to it as this sort of warm hug of a novel. And I absolutely agree that is beyond, I mean, the story is great. It's fascinating. It's fun. It's just a great adventure. And, but mostly it is comfort, I think, and charming. And it was a nice book to read. I know that we don't always like nice things, but I think in this case it was something that it was a feel good read, but I also thought that it had a lot to think about.
I think that's an important point. Kathleen and I don't actually like books where everything works out at the end or where everything's sort of accessible and easy. And so we used to joke that we can't read nice things. But I feel like this book, while it does have a happy ending and it is feel good and there is so much warmth in this book, I felt challenged by this book because it wasn't easy for me moving through the beginning to slowly let go of any preconceived notions of what is humanity, what is a creature, what is a monster, what is a person. I think this book challenged me to think about how do we define personness? I love making up words. With all of these magical creatures, and each one became more and more unusual. So like you start with some familiar things like a garden gnome, and then you move on to the Antichrist and a little boy. There's a shape-shifting teenage boy. But what really threw me is Chauncey, which is this green blob. I never quite understood what Chauncey is, and he wants to be a bellhop. So there's quite a bit of absurd here, and I was surprised along the way. I never quite knew where we were going or where things were going to end up. I don't feel that this was accessible. This really made me think. I mean, there's even philosophy splattered throughout.
I think that's a good point, and I think one of the really exciting things for me in this experience of reading it is, I think at least reading the description, an unidentifiable green blob, I don't feel that I'm going to connect with that character, right? I'm thinking, why this detail? A lot of the description reads a little bit like a punchline. And I think what is really great is that the characters aren't punchlines. There's no one who's just purely comic relief. Even it's actually, I feel for Chauncey. I mean, I think I felt so much more of a connection to him than or even I think, they refer to Chauncey as him, but really every kind of descriptor that we use is an approximation, which is interesting. They don't know about any parentage for Chauncey. They don't have like any answers to any questions. Chauncey just sort of exists. And I like that that's okay. Like his existence, it doesn't need more explanation than that. And that's kind of true, I think, of all of these characters, where, you want to have kind of those parameters of humanity. And I think when you talk about how do we define a person, certainly Theodore, I think, is the one that really comes up against that the most, and the one that Linus has to, as he's writing to the department to kind of explain what he's observing, he has to make the case, no, there's humanity in Theodore, which I think is hard to understand because he does seem sort of more animal-like to us. So I really do like just how it does question, he has his own language that Linus then learns. They learn to relate to each other, and there's this mutual respect that I think is really nice.
It's funny you bring up Theodore because I'm such a cynic. Like, yes, this is feel good, but I can't help but think if we're humanizing birds and amorphous blobs, bird-like creatures, and even Lucifer. I mean, what's so funny about the Antichrist character is that he helps out in the kitchen, and cynical Sam is wondering, well, are they preparing meat dishes? Where do they draw the line? If they're claiming humanity, are we eating steak? Is there not a cow-like character we can bring into the fold? I mean, do we... it's written about acceptance of all things and not having preconceived notions, but must we be vegan as well?
This is true. I don't know what they do eat, and it's probably a lot more of an ethical issue than maybe comes up, because I would be worried. And I think they even say, maybe not that they're eating wyverns in this world, but I think that they've been kind of hunted almost out of existence. And there's a real existential threat to all of these characters just because they are misunderstood. They're orphans for a reason, right? They don't have really a home. This is the only home that is available to them.
Letting go of being baffled, and there's so much absurdity here, but it's well written so that it really holds together. When I first read the premise, I couldn't really imagine how this was going to hold together. But I think the author, T.J. Klune, does this incredible job of not just writing each of these characters with a sensitivity, but also they each have a distinct personality, quirks, likes, and dislikes that doesn't feel forced. It's just truly interesting. When you have the shape-shifting Sal as somebody who's shy and also a poet, and you have all these little details. Talia's always looking for a fight, and she's so fierce. And even the island sprite, the character that sort of, it's like her island because she's an island sprite. Just the way she comes to really accept Linus and slowly let him in, and also the way Linus expands his mind every step of the way. It's wonderfully adventurous. It's a great escape from today and from the now. It was certainly readable. It pulls you in, and I felt swept away. I thought the pacing was wonderful. I really delighted in the characters and the details. Even Linus's relationship with his cat is sweet and well written. I really liked the book more than I expected to. I loved the way the romance is written between Linus and Arthur. That was just lovely.
I did like the romance, and I like that. I think I was joking with you earlier, like we don't tend to do a lot of romance, and we're doing this teen book club, and I'm like, yeah, we finally have a romance everyone enjoy. It's between 40-year-olds. But I think the thing is that it's just this sweet story that I do think is surprisingly all ages, even though we're talking about these older characters, not teen characters, but we also have all of these child characters. It just feels like a very universal kind of story that You're really rooting for. I like that the kids are rooting for Arthur and Linus too. I think that's maybe one of the sweetest things is that I think at one point Lucy sends Linus like a record, and they kind of have this romantic moment, like listening to the record player, and everyone is even in spite of sort of all of their differences, they're very attuned to each other's kinds of needs and just what's going on. Maybe even more so than Linus, who I think is very much in denial about, does he want to stay? What kind of person is he? Is this just a job to him? But everyone can see that it's not, that he's so invested in this. And in particular, he's invested in Arthur.
I really love that in writing about these characters and the way that they do have a home together and how they do support each other and they have such kindness is extended to each other. There's a wonderful feeling that when you're on this island reading this book, there is a warmth. I do have a quote, a very short quote to share this time, and it's, "A home isn't always the house we live in. It's also the people we choose to surround ourselves with." In the end, when Linus finishes his report and he leaves and he returns to his life and he realizes he was always perfectly satisfied with his life prior to his experience, but now he realizes that he really did find a home for himself in all of these strangers that he befriended in a very short time. And I also like, as much as this is in the fantasy realm and it's written with almost a childlike sense of wonder, but the writing is pretty elevated. The discussions, the conversations, the character buildings is quite sophisticated. But also I feel like there's a little bit of a satire here when you have the people on the mainland who are prejudiced against these children in the orphanage, and they are fearful and they are almost persecuted, and there's almost a danger of these people coming across the water and making trouble. And I think that applies to a lot of what we're dealing with right now. As a society, we have a lot of people that are difficult to define, who are maybe marginalized, and we have people who are out there hating, which perhaps people who don't spend the time getting to know people who challenge their definitions of citizenship.
I think this book definitely has this strong social conscience and is really aware of the world can respond to difference with fear, I think is certainly what is happening with these children. And as they venture into so they're kind of secluded in their own orphanage, but then the rest of the village, they are separated. And then as Linus and Arthur bring them into town, there's this kind of, no one knows what to think, I guess. And I like that there are people who are shown in the book to kind of expand their minds and to approach that from a place of wanting to learn. And I think that's kind of modeled as the ideal response. And then there are people who ultimately are shown to be, I guess, kind of ridiculous, but also scary in a sense, because they are responding with violence, they are responding with hatred, but their fears are not rooted in anything but kind of their own limitations.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the author has a balanced touch with that. So it doesn't, I think that's the one thing that really made this book successful for me, is that you do have fantasy, you do have romance, you do have social commentary. You're really surprised at I mean, some of these, when you read the list of characters, it really, it slides into the absurd. But I think the balance of all of these elements is really why I enjoyed all of these things. I probably wouldn't have enjoyed by itself, or I don't know that I would read a book or be interested in a book with such strange characters. I don't know that I would want to read any element of this book, but the way it comes together is harmonious, and the writing is really, I think, very strong. So I enjoyed it. I never had that point through the book. And sometimes, I can get to a certain part and get very aggravated by a book or feel like it's slow. I think I read it in one sitting, and it was really enjoyable. So I give it thumbs up. I thought it was just so unique and interesting and fun.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think this is something I would have picked up myself either. And I think it is because of what you said with some of those details that, it just kind of ventures into the ridiculous. And you have to have a lot of faith in the author, who I hadn't read before, that they're going to pull everything together. But he does so beautifully. And it's just, it feels low stakes in a way, but in other ways, it's grappling with these very big issues. So I like that you can kind of feel like you're on an island and sort of this vacation type of feeling, but then you're still getting a solid story there.
This is unusual that you and I both like a book with a happy ending, warm and fuzzy and joyful. That's not what we usually do here. But do you have some read-alikes for us?
I do have read-alikes. So maybe the most logical comparison I could think of was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs, which is a YA book, and I know a lot of people have read it and some people have seen the movie. So I'll go over pretty quickly what it's about. But it's basically about this boy who has grown up on his grandfather's stories about during World War II, he took refuge in this orphanage that had these children with strange powers. And throughout the book, there are these pictures of children, like kind of with sort of doing strange things. And of course, as he grows up, he thinks that the photos are fakes and he's disillusioned. But then he ends up traveling to the island and finding that maybe these kids are real, and spoiler, they are. So it's kind of this fascinating story of how he's relating to the mysterious kids on this abandoned orphanage. The second book is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, and this was written for adults. It just reminds me in the sense that it is about a main character who's kind of aloof and kind of in her own world, and then she gets wrapped up in the lives of these two kids. She's living with this family of her friend who has basically these twin step kids who spontaneously combust, and so they're kind of a problem to be dealt with because you can't just have kids combusting all over the place. And so as this woman, Lillian, starts to care for these kids, just in the sense of physically taking care of them and making sure they don't burst into flames, she starts to really care for them on a personal level. And so it's actually like a really sweet story, despite its sort of absurd premise. The last book is Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. And this is maybe a little bit similar to that Miss Peregrine type story, where it is a bunch of children who are kind of unusual in this case. They've all returned basically from, down the rabbit hole or in the back of a wardrobe. They've had these kind of portal fantasy stories, but this is what happens afterwards. So they're not going on magical quests anymore. They are, quote, the used up miracle children. And it's all about kind of how they are living together in this home for wayward children, but also then a mystery happens.
Those sound really great. I'm going to definitely pick up a few of those. I've surprised myself this month. It turns out that I actually do like absurd books with feel good vibes. But I do want to let everybody know that we are signing off for the summer. This is our last episode of the season. We will be back in the fall. So check out the New Canaan High School summer reading list, which we will share. It has great reads for both young adult and adults. We have a lot of adults that come in on when we had the rack on the floor. We have a lot of adults that come in and read through that list. It's an excellent collection. It's very well curated. So we encourage you to go check that out. And this is it. We're signing off for a while.
Yeah, be on the lookout for our teen summer reading program. We're going to be announcing that at the beginning of June. And it was great reading with everyone for this season.
Thanks for reading with us. Everybody have a fabulous summer. Bye.
Bye.